I'm going to have fun translating everything afterwards.
Good luck with that.
Hi, I'm Tom Migot from Tom Migot Photography, and this is another episode of Capture It with Tom's Friends, but it's going to be a pretty unique episode as usual. And today my guest is, well, you guessed it, this is Joe Cornish. Thanks, Joe, for being with us.
It's a pleasure, Tom.
I really appreciate. As I told you guys, I had met Joe for the first time earlier this year at the Birmingham Photography Show. Joe was talking about leaf filters. How surprising! And so I just had a few words with him, and he accepted to meet with me at some stage and do this video for you guys. So, as you know, you've been sending us a lot of your work to be reviewed, but we're going to keep this for the end. So stay tuned. First, we're going to talk about Joe. For those of you who do not know Joe, especially your French folks there, well, we're going to try to know him a little bit better. So, where did you start, Joe? You've got about, 30 years of experience now?
Yes. Well, it's very tempting to say 150 years because that's what it feels like. So I was a student in the late 70s, an art student. Discovered the camera then, really, and got addicted to it, as so many of us do. Felt that it was the only thing I really wanted to do with my life when I left uni. And so I really started in the profession in 1980, working as an assistant. And I worked in Washington for 2 years, Washington, D.C., in the United States, and then had another year and a half assisting in London, and then went freelance about 1984, 85.
What was the moment, when was that click that you said, landscape, that's what I want to do?
Well, it was probably when I was still a student. It was what I always loved doing, and a big part of that is actually that I'm a very shy person, quite an introvert, and I've always felt very at home outside, out in the landscape. I love being there, and I love responding to the forms and textures of the landscape. So really, probably talking about the 1970s. I was told on many occasions by various friends and contemporaries that you can't make a living as a landscape photographer. And it's probably true. You can't. However, I've had a go at it. And as we were discussing earlier, it is possible that I suppose my career kind of coincided with a lucky moment, looking back, that there was an explosion of continental travel at the time in the UK. Colour films were improving, publishers were getting more ambitious, and my great contemporary and friend Charlie Waite had started doing a series of colour landscape books actually mainly in France, but also in Spain and Italy, and I was lucky to follow in his footsteps with that series, and there are a number of my contemporaries who also were able to benefit from being able to travel and be paid for it and take pictures.
Sounds like a dream, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, you didn't really know that at the time, and don't forget it's very different then because you were shooting effectively blind as a film photographer, sometimes getting through 150 rolls of film on a shoot and an assignment without being able to see a thing. So it's a very, very different scenario to today, and there was quite a bit of stress and anxiety attached to that. But yes, of course, it was a great way to make a living.
And so you mentioned a question which was, well, can we make a living nowadays as a landscape photographer? Could you do it back then? Can you do it today?
The way it was done back then mainly was you would get commissioned work, and we were also fortunate to coincide with a change in copyright law. So in 1989, I think it was, Parliament passed a bill which made the essentially all artistic work that was commissioned became within the ownership of the artist, whereas previously it had been the owner in the ownership of the commissioner, and that allowed us to then develop our work as licensors. I guess I'm going to sound like I know what I'm talking about, but believe me, the business side of it's never really enthralled me very much. But what it meant was the stock industry was able to reward successful photographers really quite well. So it was rather like being in a rock group and getting royalties for work that you'd done previously. So all the new work we created would go into the libraries if it was any good, and would then be licensed, one use at a time. And the fees were very good. So it was there was a short period when some of us did quite well.
And so nowadays, it's undeniable that photography has democratized itself. Everybody can do photos at no cost, almost whatsoever. And with this, well, is that the end of landscape photographer from a professional aspect of it?
Big pause. It might be, I guess. In a way, it's certainly minimised the amount of living there is to be made from it. But I still do get some commissioned work. I'm very fortunate. I still do some work for the National Trust, for example, and for Visit Britain from time to time, and also get some work from publishers and sometimes very occasionally from commercial clients. So there is still a very, very small amount of commissioned work, but it's very hard to just shoot work and make a living from stock as one might have done in the past.
Have you ever done stock photography?
Never for its own sake. It's only ever been a byproduct of commissioned work for me.
Okay, right, and you were talking about commissioned work, but is that, nowadays, no disrespect, but when they commission you, they commission Joe Cornish, right? So there's a name which means as much as the resulting photograph. So
well, that's very kind of you, but I think that there's an element of that, but I don't think the organisations that I work for would employ me in that respect unless I was able to interpret their needs reasonably effectively.
And so what does that mean for us, a younger generation?
Well, I think what it probably means is that there will always be some work, but it's very difficult. To be fair, it's always been a fairly small amount of work available in the landscape field. But if you look around now, there are some of your generation who are making a bit of a living, at least from doing magazine articles and from licensing them abroad as well. Some of them travel, and a lot of your generation also lead workshops, and that's been a huge growth area. So you've seen, while one sort of area has kind of closed down and a door has closed, then others have opened. So it's not impossible. It's just that actually photographing in that commissioned way is changing. I would say that the other thing to do is to make a living as an artist, so making images and selling your prints, which can be done. But again, very few people can do really well with that.
And so that, for those of us, for the others who are actually watching us, when you start with photography and you realize how, once you pass the basics and you realize how fairly easy, I would say, it is to get a fairly compelling photograph. And many would actually dream of just taking the step and trying to make a living. Is that still something that how do you feel about it? Is that something that you would recommend
That's a really difficult question.
If your son was saying...
Yes, no, if it was my son, I would definitely say don't go into photography. But what I would say is do develop your photographic skills, because it's a tremendously important life skill to have. And I think the best analogy, I believe, is with writing. If you think back a few centuries, or in fact 100 years before universal education, reading and writing was the preserve of the intellectual and aristocratic elite, and now it's a universal human right to be able to read and write, and so it should be. And I think being able to make still photographs is now democratized in the same way, because the camera is so cheap and the process, as you rightly say, is essentially free. So while there is some costs attached, they aren't much greater than the costs of being able to write. And most people will write at least some of the time, writing emails, notes, writing presentations for work, writing some people write creatively. But how many writers make a living out of their writing? There are some journalists for sure, but people who do creative writing, let's say novels and poetry, for its own sake, they're a very, very small number. Possibly fewer than there are professional photographers. So I would say that just because you wanted to be a writer, it's hard to make a living as a writer. Would that stop you? Probably not. I think if you have a genuine ambition and a drive and a deep passion for the medium, and you're a young person and you want to be a photographer, you'll find a way, by hook or by crook.
And so you were telling us when you started, and when you were a young photographer, and you went to Washington DC. Then I know you went to Alaska as well for an expedition. I also know that you've been doing workshops as well in the US. Most of your work is done here in the UK, right? You've covered the whole north of England, Scotland pretty well. Is there any other areas, any other locations that you dream of going to?
It's one I do get asked a lot. I mean, undoubtedly there are some places in the world that I'd like to see, and Greenland is the one that probably immediately springs to mind.
Because you already went to Iceland.
Oh yes, I've been to Iceland a few times. In fact, I'm going again next week, and I've been very, very lucky to go to Antarctica, which is is a huge privilege, and also to Baffin Island in the Canadian North. I've been to Svalbard. Most of the places I go seem to be quite cold, but that's the kind of light that I love. And Greenland is the great mystery, great unknown. One of the reasons I like to go to Greenland is I don't know what it looks like, and that's part of why I'm interested to go, because I'm aware that it's a mountainous land with a huge ice cap, the biggest in the world outside of Antarctica, and I'm fascinated by snow and ice, but if I don't ever go, it won't worry me.
So it's quite interesting because it's such a contrast with what we know you work on. And we're going to go through your work in a second. And it's so far away from it.
I think that what you have to remember is when we go through the work that you've selected, that comes from my gallery website. I don't have a personal website. I'm hoping I will do one day. It's being worked on in theory, but I keep putting it off because I keep doing new work, and I'm finding it very difficult to reflect back on my career and decide what I would like to show or share. And also, I don't really know if anybody's interested, so I have a huge amount of personal work that I could show you prints that I have in the car. That's the sort of thing that I'm sort of very tentatively and vulnerably wanting to kind of share. And the work that you've selected here is, some of it's relatively old, some of it's more contemporary, but it's part of the gallery collection. Most of the images, I'm proud of them, so there's no problem with that. No, it's a nice selection. It shows the north of England predominantly, and the reason that's the case is because the north of England is on our back doorstep at the gallery, so it's what people identify with. And one of the really wonderful aspects of having had a gallery is that you discover so many people strongly identify with landscape as part of their lives, and so if they invest in a photographic work of art, they're likely to be drawn to somewhere they recognise, because it's something that they have memories for.
And a landscape to you means more than just a nice photograph, right? There's a sense of duty that you have with landscape and recording the existence for future generation. You're very environmental focus as well, and we can see this in your DVD as well, that I recommend to all of you guys. It's called With Landscape in Mind.
Correct.
And I've just watched it again last week, and it's just a fantastic DVD, do not expect to learn about the theory of photography from a technical aspect with a camera and F values, ISO, and this kind of thing. This is not what it's about. It's really about understanding what it takes to fresh pot of tea. Fantastic. What it takes to actually get a really compelling image, but beyond the image is what that particular landscape or scenery means, and the influence of human behavior and factories, especially in North of England, northeast of England. So I recommend to all of you guys, fantastic DVD. And talking about your work, and which we see as well in the DVD, what is your approach? How do you actually go out there? I mean, you're lucky to live in Yorkshire, which is a fantastic region.
Yeah.
And people would look at your work and say, well, my landscape in my backyard doesn't look like this. Do you believe that? Do you believe that there's something special about Yorkshire, or anybody's backyard has something to offer, and it's just a matter of finding the right time, the right moment, and the right angle?
I think if you're a passionate photographer, you'll always find something to photograph, and that might be that, if you live in an inner city, it'll be the landscape of the streets. If you live in the suburbs, you'll find things to photograph there. And I mean, the reason that Jenny and I moved to North Yorkshire is because, or at least partly, we didn't want to live in London, which is where we were, because neither of us really felt at home there. And it was about being somewhere. It was partly an opportunity for me to develop my landscape photography, and also to live a kind of lifestyle that we felt more comfortable with. So there was a deliberate choice in that respect. But I think if you are a passionate landscape photographer, you'll probably end up moving to an area that gives you that kind of inspiration. I suspect that there is still, though, great opportunities, certainly in the UK. I mean, we are so lucky to live in this country. There's for all sorts of reasons at the moment, including the fact that my daughter has been abroad for the last year in a war-torn country, Iraq. I'm very, very conscious of how lucky we are to live here, and not only that, but my travels around the world, going to some marvelous countries. I'm always amazed when I come home to find how, although it's a crowded place, there are many millions of people living here, there still seems to be space, and the nature of the land is just fascinating. A big part of that, by the way, I think, is the weather. The fact that we have such varied weather.
We love it as much as we hate it.
Well, I love it mostly. I know that might seem strange, but the older I get, the more I love it. And sometimes it can drive you mad, but at the same time, you have to learn to be philosophical and optimistic. If you weren't able to do that, then it's the wrong hobby or the wrong profession. That's so much part of being a landscape photographer is learning, that you're not in control. You are a humble individual in the face of much greater forces than you, and you work around the light, you work around the conditions, and you respect and revere your subject matter. And that's I think what makes it so special for me. I enjoy photographing lots of things, by the way, but landscape is always special.
So how is a day in your life like? And I'm not talking about when you do workshops. When you don't do workshop, what do you do? Do you wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, go for the sunrise, walk all day, come back home at night? And
every day is different. I mean, workshop days, sometimes it starts with a dawn and sometimes it doesn't. That's I've got to the sort of age now where if I get up at 3:30 in the morning every day, then I'm going to suffer later in the day. And you do have to be able to perform. In fact, I don't do workshops in the summer any longer. Not in the high summer. The days are too long, and it's very, very difficult. So I prefer to work in the winter, in the kind of from the equinox of September the 21st through to March the 21st. It's my favourite time of year to work. The days are shorter. Beautiful colours, interesting conditions. But in the summer, I still enjoy the summer. But I'm not going to spend a whole day out with my camera. I also think that sessions of photography are very, very intense. So if you go out and try and work for 14 hours or 15 hours non-stop, then you're going to get absolutely exhausted. So you have to learn to rest and pace yourself, and especially if you're a hill walker. Hill walking and mountaineering takes an awful lot out of you. So, and when it comes to making pictures, you have to be fully focused and energized to do that well.
Well, it's time to see the pictures then.
Okay.
All right. So, selected only a few photographs that you guys see on the screen here in Lightroom. And let me just make some room here, like this. So, can I actually zoom? Let me make
it a little bigger.
A little bit bigger, yes. So they might, I think, looking back at them, they all have something in common, and I think it's because I picked them, and I probably found what I like in your style as I'm looking at them right now. And for me, is the light. That's how I discovered you several years ago. Not through leaf filter commercial, not through phase one commercial, but through really the light. And the way you were talking about the light in some of the videos that I found. And when I look at your work, it's all about the light. And if the light condition was different, the landscape wouldn't be the same, and the picture would definitely not be the same at all. What is your approach to it? How do you, for example, if we take a picture like this one, which I appreciate is very small here because I downloaded them illegally from Joe's gallery website. But how do you actually approach this? Do you look at a map? Do you look online on different pictures? And obviously that's your backyard.
This place is called Kirknall, I think, and it is the edge of the North York Moors. I'd never been there before. I just wanted to explore the edge of the moor at that part of the moors, which is very unknown. Walked up there. This is actually my second trip there, onto this it's a very odd spot called Windegg. It is windy, and this is a time of year when you can see I think it's rowan berries in the foreground. What can I say about it? Really, I think that the lighting. So I have a couple of points I'd like to make. The first is shooting into the light is exciting. It's also extremely difficult when you're shooting with 5x4 format film.
Was that film?
That was shot with large format film camera. Wow. I needed 2 grads to restrain the sky, and actually, if I had shot it on digital, it would have been a lot easier. It's actually had a lot of work in Photoshop just to balance it as well. But I love the quality of light, partly because looking towards the light, there is something that draws you, that creates depth. And the foreground, all of the foreground is actually in shadow, and that's a fairly typical characteristic of my work, to be in the dark, looking towards the light. And
actually, that's very, I don't know if you got inspired, but everybody at some stage got inspired by Ansel Adams, and that was one of his techniques as well, to make sure that the corner of the picture would actually be darker than the center to actually draw the attention.
And you can look back through the history of photography, and there are many photographers who use that approach or have written about it, including one of my favourites, Eugene Smith, who was a documentary photographer, and he talked about the light being in the print and making prints which have the light within them. And I feel, from a kind of philosophical point of view, that when that of all the human characteristics that define us and make life worth living, hope is fundamental. So you need hope, and I mean, life can be sometimes very depressing, and you get down, even though you're lucky to live in a beautiful country like this. So I actually get great therapeutic value from looking at light as a kind of as a source of optimism, really. You could describe it in all sorts of ways. Maybe another day I would describe it differently. But I also feel that the skies, which have got clouds and texture and shape and form, have mood and express emotion. The one type of lighting condition I find impossible is blue sky and no clouds.
Well, we hate that.
That's just, it is almost impossible. But I mean, if you think that landscape reflects the human condition, then a blue sky with no clouds, it's like a human being with no personality.
That says a lot to all the people who live in the south of France.
Many apologies to them, and I'm sure they love that. But I'm just using my own experience to reflect on the way that I approach landscape, and I'm sure that nobody in the south of France would necessarily want to swap with North Yorkshire.
That's probably true. Although they come to Scotland, though, so
yes, they do. Yeah.
Here's the photograph that I talked to you about earlier this evening. Talk to us about this, because this is not a composite.
No, it's a straight picture, although it has had some help in the sky to bring out the texture, clarity.
Clarity, that's what I was thinking, yes.
Yeah.
So, I don't know what you guys think when you watch this photograph, but to me this is extremely powerful, and even more powerful when you know that this is not a composite. And to me, so many times we find great sky, right? Because from time to time, at least once a month, there's going to be a great sky that you can just capture the sky and just say, well, one day if I don't know what to do with my sky, I'm just going to slide this one in. But was this shot in film or digital?
It was shot with a Nikon D800, so it is digital.
Digital.
And it is a storm front, as you rightly surmise, and within about 30 seconds of that picture being taken, I was absolutely soaked. So it was incredible. It really was like that. All I've done really is bring out a little bit more separation. There's been a little bit of balancing work as well, but it's fairly minimal. By the way, just quickly go back just to convey scale. That little point there, if you can identify it with your cursor, is a human being. So that's a figure, just to put it into perspective. So that's the kind of scale. So I'm on a cliff about 250 feet above the beach, looking down.
That's amazing. And it's what's really amazed me. And you were talking about the light and that and how therapeutic looking at the light and the effect it has on the landscape and so on is. When I look at a photograph like this, I'm mesmerized by the simplicity, not of the capture, but by the simplicity of the scenery. And yet, it is compelling, it is meaningful, it's somehow, there's a lot of moods, there's it brings you feeling, and at the end, I think that's all that matters, right? When you do landscape, even if there is a message around the environment and historical purpose, it needs to transpose something. Is that something that you're always trying to convey in your photograph, a message, a narrative?
I would love to say yes, but that'd be lying, because I think actually, really, when you've been photographing for as long as I do, you do so much by instinct that it's all you can do is essentially process your life into your work. So as time goes by and you become more aware of how the world works, maybe, and how if you're an artist, you do effectively translate your own feelings, beliefs, belief systems, relationships, and experiences into your imagery. Then you can at times reflect back, but generally at the time you're feeling it. So what I do think is that all pictures, all composition is basically the study of relationships of form and relationships of light, and relationship is fundamental to being human. So to me, it is an analogy for the human condition. And in landscape, where on the face of it you're just looking at a scene, the underlying relationships in the image still essentially they convey or communicate to the viewer something of the artist's view of the world. So if you think of it like that, then it's possible to understand this is a very subtle quality that's coming. And I think a good artist is able to convey much more than just the sum of the parts in their picture.
And it's interesting because that picture that we see here on the screen is not only compelling from an artistic point of view, but it has a strong message as well. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this one?
Well, I can. I mean, on the face of it, it is a scene of Upper Swaledale. The history of the place is pretty interesting. It's actually a lead mining area predominantly, or was during the sort of 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. It's a historic farming area, and that picture. I mean, there's no great. To be honest, my own experience of making the image was very simple. It's actually shot from a roadside. I had passed it numerous times before, and I had in mind that there might be such an image one day. And I was just very, very lucky that the light worked for me that day. Probably early October, you can see the autumn colours. And that synthesis of colour and form and the way the sheep are and everything, it's just one exposure, one 5x4 exposure.
But it's also, what I was trying to get at is also the historical message that this image transfer to the viewer, in the way that this is very specific of this region, the houses are, and hopefully will remain this way, the way of living.
It's
which is not the case on the east side of the same location, but if you go more on the east coast of in England, that wouldn't be the case, right?
Well, the barns of the Dales, and they are at their most concentrated in Swaledale, is part of a great historic farming tradition, and they are amazing. They're like little monopoly structures that run right through the valley. Each of them would have been probably owned and built by a specific farmer. I actually don't know much of the history, but the dry stone wall construction. There's another in Swaledale. That illustrates it perhaps a little better in a way, because of the number of field barns there are there. But it was to do with the way that the sheep were. I think I actually don't know the details, but I'm sure that it was very important for them in winter, to keep the flock at some points anyway under cover when it was very cold, probably much colder 200 years ago than it is today. Whether those buildings will survive remains to be seen. We all hope so, because they're so much a feature of that historic landscape. But they do need support. Every roof there is, at any given point in time, is deteriorating. And if there's no commercial value in the buildings, then the pressure on the landowners to keep them in good order grows, and it's difficult for them.
I'd like to go back to this region. I haven't done any photograph in this region, but I'd love to. It's remarkable. And here we have another example of this one, which I found very interesting on this one, because
it's actually not my picture, I should tell you.
Is it not?
No, this is Paul Harris, who's a good friend of mine, and I think that the gallery bought this picture off him for a card. So,
okay.
So don't worry, that's good.
Because I was going to ask him if you actually pay the guy the farmer, to go exactly at the moment.
It's a brilliant picture, isn't it? And,
I love the shadow, and it's just...
Well, I'm really glad you brought it up, because I think that it also makes the point that the gallery is as much... It's not about me, it's not just about me, it's very much a community gallery.
I'll put the details as well on the blog article with this video, and I'd like definitely to go and visit it. Absolutely. Another thing as well that I wanted to talk about is this series, these particular 4 images, which have given me ideas. You captured a season. How did you do it? How did you do to make sure that you would be able to come back on the next season exactly at the right spot, exactly in the same angle, exactly everything? Did you use GPS?
I didn't. Well, this is my back doorstep. Not quite. It's about half an hour's walk from home, so it's not difficult for me to get to. and therefore it's one of those places that you can go to when there's a lot of snow on the ground. So that's a good thing. I had no idea that I was going to make this series, but I still remember pretty much the very first time that I came across this scene, and I was really excited because there seemed no particular. I'd certainly never seen a picture of it before, but it made itself immediately a kind of iconic series of relationships. That the hills seem to be positioned in such a way that it looks towards the west to the light, and the tree seems to look back the other way. So they're kind of folding towards one another, and it's a beautiful tree. It's a larch, European larch, and it has this fantastic gestural branch. It's on a windy spot, so it's often moving in the wind. What you can't see is immediately behind me. If I took one step back, I would fall 100 foot down into a quarry. So that edge is eroding, so it's actually becoming more difficult to make that picture, because where I stood to make that picture, which was probably made in 2001 or so, doesn't exist any longer.
So still film. That was shot in film.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so which season did you start with?
Well, I probably started in autumn, but you see, I've just been back there and made that composition, many times. I've got probably hundreds of versions of this. It's like we were talking earlier about practice, and I see it as part of the process of being a photographer, is to actually, as well as doing something new and being creative, but to actually do what you've done before and observe your own changing views and opinions and feelings and approach and view of light and so on as you develop as an artist. So going somewhere familiar has its value too.
Is that a chase to perfection?
No, because I don't see it as being about perfection. I don't think that art is a pursuit of perfection. I see it as a journey, and that actually you can never reach perfection. What you might be trying to do is to perfect your technique, but the work itself is never about perfection.
So that actually brings me an interesting point, which we discussed earlier as well, is that still today you shoot for you, primarily for you, unless of course you're doing some commission work. But when you go out there with your camera, the first person that you think of is you.
Well, I don't think of it.
Well, no, not that way, but it's for you. You do it because you like what you see. You like you're going for your own feeling, and not about how am I going to be perceived, how people are going to think of me, think of my work, and therefore think of me. You don't see it that way.
No.
And you always saw it that way, or you see it now because it's comfortable after 30 years and you've got a name attached to your body? I don't know how that sounds.
Where? I think I know what you mean, but how can I answer that? I don't know. Where the way that I did 4 years training in fine arts, and I worked with some very, very artistic people, and one thing that is common, I think on the whole, is that you soon become aware that the only work that is likely to transcend and appeal to others is work that's done intensely for the self first and foremost. So even commissioned work, I would suggest that if you look at sort of Beethoven or Handel or any of the great composers who did work for commission, many of them did, while they might have paid some lip service to the commission, basically they were working for themselves. They were expressing something from deep down within their soul that needed an outlet. And I see art generally as being that way. It's made by an individual, and if it's good enough, it may express something to the wider human community. But I don't know how that works or how it happens. It just does sometimes. So I think that it would be the wrong way round to be thinking about your audience if you think that way. I don't think that way, personally. I'm just interested in photographing to try to explore my own relationship with my subject and to pay honour to it, really. I do have a reverence for landscape and see it as, it is it's where we come from. So it's a great subject. It's inexhaustible, and it's very exciting. And light is always transforming it.
And well, as we look at this amazing capture of something that is temporal in a way that you come back maybe an hour later, it's gone. An hour before, it wasn't the case. And I'm talking about much more than light. I'm talking about the mist here, the fog. How do you actually approach this? You notice that the forecast is going to be misty. You know the condition. You're used to it, and you just go with the hope of capturing something. And you already know the location, or how does that play out in your head? How much preparation do you do beforehand?
Well, it's amazing how often very little preparation at all. I mean,
That's not the message that I want to call.
Well, it may be surprising, but it's true because, one of the things I love about landscape photography is it's very, very unpredictable. And often I will go to a place where I might have seen something before that I feel there's got potential, and I think this was one of those, but I didn't know where I was going to stand or what scene would play out before me. I had absolutely no idea. And there's a lot of luck that swirls around, rather like the fog in this picture, in photography. But as the experienced sports people are inclined to say, the more you practice, the luckier you get. And obviously, you know how to load. Use another analogy, how to load the cards in your favour. By being out at a time when, yes, the conditions could be interesting. And I mean, yes, if one, I mean, you mentioned earlier light. If you think that the images are predominantly about light, then working at dawn is often a magical time.
So the next thing that I'd like to bring up is two particular photographs, which to me I think is going to be a good closing argument to your work. Is those two, and although they might not have much in common when you look at them, to me they have something in common. They are both iconic postcard, I would say, except that the one on the left is not the one that we're used to. And we're talking about the Eilean Castle, which is in Scotland. And anybody who has done any research or any type Scotland in Google, you will see this castle. It's been used many times in movies, from James Bond to The Maid of Honor lately and so on. That picture has been seen by millions, taken by millions. How do you go from the regular shot, parking shot, as you you used that expression earlier, to something like this? And, well, on this one it's a little bit different, because this one is a little bit more common. So how is your approach to this kind of thing? What is the best advice you would give to somebody who wants to come to Scotland, but this castle, and thinking, oh, I've got to capture this, or I go to Paris, I've got to capture the Eiffel Tower, or I go to London, I've got to capture Big Ben. But you need to capture something unique. So how do you actually work? What was your process maybe on this one?
The fact is that this is the castle that launched 100 million shortbread tins, I think, didn't it? So it is literally probably the most photographed scene in Scotland. And I always swore that I would never stop and photograph it, because I've driven past it 100 times going to Skye and back. And then one day I got a commission from Britain on View to photograph Eilean Castle. So I wasn't about to turn them down on a point of principle. It then became a challenge to me, a personal challenge. How could I approach it differently? When the window emerged for me to make the picture, I was up in Scotland with some friends. In fact, I was staying at Rannoch Moor, so it was 2 hours drive from there, or maybe a bit more even. And so I set off at 4 o'clock in the morning, one morning, even though it was January, so the dawn was fairly late. I arrived well before sunrise. The moon was up, and rather than stop in a car park, I immediately explored a little road behind the castle, knowing that was there on the map, and got out of the car, made a couple of pictures of the moon over the castle, and then started thinking again. I felt a bit frustrated and a bit constrained, because although this wasn't a familiar view, it still didn't feel different enough. And then I just looked behind me, at the mountain behind me, and thought, it was a bit of a light bulb moment. It's like, that's what I'm going to do. So it does take a while, to get basically my mountaineering boots on and gaiters, which I did have. I've been doing a lot of work in Scotland at the years previously, and had to find a way up through private land. It was like a gorse thicket, about 100 metres long, which wasn't much fun. But eventually I got out onto the open hill and just kept climbing until I felt the perspective gave me relationships that I liked, not too far away, so the castle is still significant, but also far enough away to create a feeling of space, dimension behind it. And essentially, I set up my tripod. I moved around 2 or 3 times through the course of the morning, but I stayed from, I guess, by the time I started shooting, it was 7:30 up there until 12.
All right.
So it was all that time. I did eventually have breakfast at about 1:30 in the afternoon. And I saw the changes in the light. Literally, it went from minute to minute. Every minute was different.
Mm-hmm.
I could have made, a sequence of pictures 1,000 long.
When did you?
Every single one would have been different.
When did you capture this?
That's actually mid-morning.
No. I'm talking about the year.
Oh, the year? I think it was 2010.
All right, so digital.
Yes, it's shot with the Phase 1 on a Linhof Techno.
Okay. And for those of you who do not know what that is, you should see a picture showing on your screen right now what that looks like. Very intriguing camera combination. Is there any particular reason why you actually shot that in January? Did you want something with the snow, or it just happens to be there? And
I just happened to be there, and I'm not sure how well received that was by my commissioning client. But all I will say is that they accepted it, and I hope it's been good for them, obviously. What you see beyond, by the way, is sky.
Yes.
In the far distance, and if you look really carefully, maybe not this as it's a low-res file, but you can actually see the Sky Bridge.
Yes.
Crossing between Kyle of Lochaush and near to Broadford. So yeah, it's. But what was amazing was that in spite of the fact that the water looks really flat and calm, the clouds were moving across the sky quite quickly, and there were snow showers, 2 snow showers that morning, and everything just disappeared. So it was remarkable conditions, just heaven for photography.
So I think that really it's a picture that really illustrates something that we should all think of when we go out there. Wherever we live, there's always something that's going to be very iconical close to where we live or where we play with our camera. And we got to think twice before actually taking the shot to make that shot unique, and not just because of the time of the year or the weather and the light condition, but also about the angle. And
I actually think, just on that point, that I've always felt, I've partly as a working photographer, I've had to photograph well-known views. In fact, the very first place I remember having these ideas were when I was photographing Mont Saint-Michel in Normandy.
We're going to have one, actually.
Okay, well, and I actually thought that I remember photographing it one afternoon where there was storm clouds moving behind it and amazing light, and thinking, this is what you do with iconic locations, is you find unique moments of light. Now, you also, hopefully, find something a bit more creative in terms of viewpoint and so on as well. But I guess what I would take from that is that the challenge to photograph something that's well known is to photograph it in a different way. And that's what makes it still exciting to photograph something that might be considered hackneyed or cliched. So I think to feel something is a cliche is to be cynical, and I don't like the idea of being cynical about landscape.
That's a very good valid point. So let's see. I think that was That was oh, you know, I have to ask it because to me that was I was intrigued by it. Can you explain me this photograph? What? Because it's just I discovered this. I discovered the work that you've done, and we see a little bit of part. I don't know if that was shot as you were doing the movie because there seems to be similar landscape or similar tone to it. But what drove you to capture this?
I was working on a book on Northumberland's coast at the time. I was still shooting film, so that was made with Fuji Velvia, which probably explains why the greens are so vivid. I wouldn't do it that way now. I probably would shoot it quite differently now. And this place is called Boomer. There's a little row of fishing terraced cottages. I guess they were fishermen's cottages at one time. And you still see the tractors which drag the boats down into the sea there. Right. And they probably still work. You might not think so looking at them. But it's really funny when you go to there's Redcar actually has a similar a kind of tractor park where they take the boats out and launch them in the sea. It's just a traditional northeast way of launching the boats, which are called cobbles.
Okay. And
they're based on Viking, the sort of evolution of the Viking longboat in actual fact. And very, very stable. I don't know what I can tell you about it other than that it's one of the least photogenic places you could ever imagine. So making a picture of it is quite a challenge. So I think what I tried to do was to find some kind of agreement between all these wheel shapes and anything that you see that big pile of rope also has a lot of curving forms. There's the wheels of the tractors, and there's even a thresher on the back of that tractor at the back or something. And there's the little eye of the headlight on that tractor. And I very carefully position the camera to try to identify those shapes within the picture structure. So although on the face of it it's just a picture of a couple of tractors and the end of a terrace of houses, I did think quite a long time about how to compose it.
All right, so that's where I was leading. I was not implying that it was just a shot, just like that. But it's interesting that on this particular photograph, and you talked about that earlier, about shape, that relationship that you build with the environment and the shape, the forms, and everything. And here, that's basically what you went for, the patterns.
Well, sorry, Tom, just to interrupt, but there's one. When I look at my pictures, I quite often realise afterwards there are things that happen which are subliminal. And one thing I would point out is that the roof line of the terrace is almost exactly parallel to this pipe, and kind of analogous to it in terms of the position and the frame as well. So they're opposites. So there's a certain kind of subtle observation of form, which makes it perhaps a little bit better than just a snapshot.
Yeah, and that's how actually one could explain why it works, which might not be all the things that you're conscious of when you take it. You just like it. There's something that you like about it. You might not be able to explain it that as you take it.
Exactly, and often it's afterwards. So, for example, if you look at the front of the tractors, they're almost exactly lined up. Now, that seems to be quite a deliberate juxtaposition as well, to create perhaps a little bit of tension there, or to try to clarify the forms in some way, make one stand forward in front of the other. There's always compromises when you're dealing compositionally with complex subjects, and that was probably the best compromise I could make. I do remember having a lot of fun just playing around with the positioning of things, and I still feel quite passionately about the process of observation that makes a picture, that it's an intense identification with the place and the forms and the structures within the place. So to begin with, you're just drawn to something because you like it, you love it, you're moved by it in some way. But once you've done that, then begins this process of examination. It's quite a surgical process almost. You're scrutinizing every last line and form so that within the frame there's a sense of resolution. I would not use the term perfection, but I do think it's about this
balance.
Balance, absolutely. Energy flow, choreography of form and light.
It's very poetic in a way. So it's interesting that from something that may look very industrial, like, although we're not talking about industry here, but very modern in a way, kind of a contrast of the human touch on the land, and yet poetic. So interesting. So you were talking about scrutinizing. Let's scrutinize what our viewers have sent you. And I hope I have the name of everybody. Let's start with this one. This one I know anyway. This one is from Sylvain Lepoutre. Some of you may know him. Mon petit réflexe. What would you say about this one?
Well, I think it's a fabulous composition, and you know, at great conditions, it's the sort of thing that you would love to see. I love the atmosphere. I love the simplicity of the idea, and yet there is a kind of complexity too in the fence. The position of the last fence post immediately below the little shrub beyond it seems very critical. I love the precision of that. There's one or two notes that I might, if it had been me, I'd like to think I could have done this, and I hope that's a compliment to Sylvain. I do think it's a brilliant picture. The only reservation, I have a slight annoyance with one of the fence posts. Do you see just overlapping another one there?
You talk about this one?
Yeah, and I'm not sure if that's deliberate, but I'd love to have just seen him go a tiny bit closer, so he could have just drawn just a tiny bit of negative space between the two posts there. But a wonderful composition and a very subtle interpretation of a very simple scene.
That is from Mario. Mario is a Scottish, so he lives around here. He's very active as well on social media. What would you say?
That's really interesting. That I have to be careful what I say, because I'm not. I can't be sure. I'm guessing that is shot with additional lighting. I think it must be. So he will have used the light to illuminate the stones. And can we tell? We probably can't tell.
I will. Well, not necessarily with the flash in the metadata, but I'm thinking everybody has put a description. So we may see it in the second.
Okay.
So let's see. It was the first to post.
It's certainly a very creative interpretation of this landscape.
So what does it say? Lawn tree, Mirror Bay. I have so many photos of this. Guys, so I wanted to do something a bit different. I had to get up at 4 a.m. to get here early. Lack of filter. And needed to have a longer exposure. Hoped it worked, and thanks for the time.
No, it's interesting. I mean, I think that it's so, perhaps it was even done with post-production, but I don't think so. I think it was done with lighting, and I think it would be a torch or a head torch maybe, rather than flash. And the backlighting is, that I suspect is at least very partly, if not largely, generated in post-production, but it's been... There's a powerful use of simple iconography there, which makes it a very striking image. It's very symmetrical, so symmetry, and especially symmetry with a bit of asymmetry like that, to me that's often the most powerful way to compose an image. So very, very interesting. I think too that I'm intrigued by the clouds, which seem to become like a mightier mountain range somewhere in the distance.
Yes.
I don't think that it can be mountains
higher than the
which I guess that might be fortuitous, but that's something that I really like about that image.
All right, so far so good. What about this one? Well, this one is signed, so it's Nicolas Savigna, so I believe he's in France. And let's see if we have the detail. He says Savoie. Have you actually been there?
No.
So he says Le Revard, that's how it's called, also known as the Little Canada. Picture taken during a hike with a very cloudy forecast. And at one moment there was just a hole and the light went through.
Well, Nicolas has correct. Well, it certainly is an amazing moment, isn't it? I shouldn't be critical because I think it's very difficult when you're looking at a low resolution version of the image. There are some issues in the sky there.
Yes.
But he will have also made it slightly more risky because he's used some quite strong post-production techniques, which maybe has introduced quite a lot of noise into that image. I would love to see the original raw file and maybe go through the processing with him. I'd like to see the steps. Certainly very skillfully done, beautifully framed, and I think he may have had a little bit of a problem with the snow in the foreground because it looks rather muddy. I suspect that may be because it's been darkened
afterwards.
Yes, so as not to draw light away from the sun in that kind of wonderful middle distance where the houses are. Very, very atmospheric image. Perhaps very slightly, for my taste, very slightly over-processed, but it's a beautiful moment.
Yeah, a lot of clarity maybe on the trees. Is that what you
Yeah.
think of?
Yes. Yeah.
So I was talking about Mont Saint-Michel.
Saint-Michel.
And I've tried myself Mont Saint-Michel, and it ended up in my potential folder because I've never been happy with it.
Yeah, I think that's a marvellous composition. I love the kind of humour of it, particularly the broken down shed and the tree growing out of it, and contrasting against this sort of really one of the wonders of European art and architecture in the distance. It does tell you quite a lot about the environment immediately around the island. And I guess this is in a salt marsh part of the intertidal zone, so it's right at the top of the high tide zone, perhaps maybe only on spring tides, I'm not sure, but you can see Normandy in the background there.
It was actually shot 2 weeks ago because it says panoramic taken last week, and that was sent the 6th of September, so only a few weeks ago. As he was doing a hike, and he basically stitched that in Lightroom with a new
Panorama feature. It's a beautiful photo. I would personally suggest he tries a black and white rendering and has a play with the colour channels, because the green doesn't do a lot for me personally, and I think that with black and white he could create something that has perhaps a more graphic quality to it, and I think it'll be wonderful for those clouds.
So this one is from Rob. So Rob is a local artist here in Edinburgh, and if you just walk along the coast, Sylvanus and others, you will often see him. So what do you think of that one?
It's a very, very interesting study.
He specialized in, I should add as well, he's specialized himself, he's an amateur, but he specialized himself in long exposures.
Well, I think the long exposure technique is very, very effective here. Why? Because the simplification effect of the water means that the water becomes watercolor, almost literally just reflecting the colors of the sky. I feel that if I'm being technically critical, that the water should be a bit darker. I mean, it seems for me a tiny bit too light in relation to the reflected light of the sky. I also find the blue of the sky is unbalancing because it's so saturated.
Oh, in the corner on that part here.
Yeah, really interesting composition. My only kind of trouble with it is that the line on the top of the staves in the distance
doesn't separate itself.
It coincides with the horizon, and I find that troubling. I'm suspecting that he didn't have a scope to get higher. I might be wrong, but maybe he could find a way of getting higher in future if he wants to try it again. And to go lower might create something even more confusing, because then the foreground form would start to run into the pier itself. So as a working photographer, I'm very sympathetic with the compositional difficulties that arise, but I do find that a bit of a problem.
So there's something as well that it's worth mentioning. It says this is 2 exposures taken with 6-stop filter and a 3-stop grad. The sky had 20 second and the foreground had 40 second, which would explain why the foreground is so bright, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
All right.
You would.
So that was a rather interesting photograph, this one. I will figure out who did this one. What do you think?
It's
There's a lot of information, isn't it?
It is. It's a fantastic scene, and just utterly wonderful conditions. I'm very envious. I'm pretty sure it's France. I think I recognise those as being the Pre-Alps, and it may be in Provence. But anyway, wonderful, wonderful scene. I've got really nothing to criticise particularly, but I wouldn't probably have processed it that way myself. I think that I find the foreground, if I can...
Okay, so his name is Olep,
Okay.
and it's Château de Soyons, dans la Drôme. I'm not so good in French geography, so I don't know where it is. It says in the background, le synclinal de Sous, and the 3 biques. La Vieille, the day before it rained quite a lot, and I hope that the mist, the morning mist, and I had hoped for a morning mist. That's what he said.
Well, I think it's absolutely great. The one thing I would suggest to Olip is that he makes the foreground darker, because at the moment it feels unbalanced.
Yeah.
And I also think that the mountain range is too contrasty, so it looks unnaturally sharp, and because of that, there's a kind of conflict in that wonderful softness of the light you associate with this soft feeling, and I think there's a little bit too much sharpening or clarity or structure or something going on generally. So I think be confident. It's a wonderful picture. There's no need to over process this.
You believe more in a realism approach to landscape in general.
Yes, that's my taste. I mean, that's my baggage.
Yeah.
That's my prejudice. What can I say? I suppose that this is more. I still see there's quite a lot of highlight recovery in this one. If you look at along the row of the trees, you can see that. I suspect it's Lightroom doing a little bit of tone mapping. So that I think one should pay attention to. However, the softness of the light and the softness of the rendering are generally very consistent. So I like that image very much. Very simple. That is a very poetic picture, to be honest. I think it does speak of light, and it has a very soft and warm rhythmic quality. Look at the shape of the road, the profile of the trees, and the feeling of depth and recession, and the feeling of light has a lot of wonderful qualities to it.
Okay, so this one, I would have to say, this was shot by Tom in the Pentland Hills.
Oh, it's
last
you.
year. Yes, it's me.
Cheat, that's terrible.
I cheated, I had to. So yes, that's me. Well, thank you very much.
Okay. Oh, I wonder if that's Brittany. What an amazing scene.
I know this one actually broke my page on my website because of the engine to render the image.
Oh, okay.
It couldn't cope with this landscape.
Okay.
Photo taken.
Yes,
Lac
it is.
Bretagne. Yeah, Brittany.
Yeah, well, amazing. It's really interesting because there's the little boats, and then there's the islands, and then the thunderclouds in the distance are like islands in the sky. Floating islands. I think it's absolutely delightful the way that's kind of identified and seen. For me, my taste a little hard as well, but I think a slightly softer processing would have been pleasing, and also very punchy colour. But the colour's pleasing. That's fine. It's very blue, but then I think that suits the mood, and the blue balances against the orange of the sunset too.
It's almost like you could imagine an industrial city. In the background, there's the clouds, the formation of clouds.
Yeah.
The way it works, it looks like chimneys of some kind of factory, gas factory, like we have at Grangemouth, for example.
Well, there you are. You see, that's your imagination at work there. I probably see it differently to that, but what I do think is really effective is just the way that the islands and the cloudscape are. They do have a really dynamic relationship. I think it's very, very good.
I think that's the Alps. It's Mont Blanc, actually, I believe.
It reminds me immediately of the photographer Bradford Washburn, great American photographer.
All right.
So a very important figure, actually, in American mountaineering and survey work, and also a great photographer, great scientist. And because of that, I'm inclined to suggest a black and white rendering again, and I think that will make it even more powerful. Although the colour does impart a certain depth that one might be lost in the black and white, but I love the shadows of the three figures. That's a great picture.
How do you think the blue sky would actually appear in black and white? Because
it would be dark, relatively dark, and I think that it perhaps would help to increase the sense of mood, which comes from all of those clouds. It might be worth just maybe tightening a little, because you could almost crop the sky out, actually.
And do you think the three hikers, the three mountaineers here, bring something?
Oh, you bet. Yeah, very much so. I think they're critical to the success of the picture. Well, it's beautiful lighting. It really, really is. It's like a spotlight on nature, isn't it? Or on the castle, anyway, and also in the background. There's a kind of lighting that I love, because I feel that light and shade and light together create and impart a feeling of depth, and that picture definitely has that. Again, the blue sky is a little saturated for my taste. I suspect it's shot with a Canon. I think I recognise that Canon blue, but I might be wrong. A lovely picture, not one that challenges me greatly in terms of it feels very much part of the a tradition of landscape art, but it's very beautiful.
That I shooted as well. So this is actually the dollar picture I was talking about.
Oh, right, okay.
So this is the one that I did a video a couple of weeks ago about.
Right. It is. You've done very well. I love the clouds over the... And it was shot with a Canon, wasn't it?
It was.
Oh, yeah.
50 Mark III, yeah.
So the cloud over the castle. But the timing is great, Tom, and that. Very, very good. And as you were saying, you paint... You don't do it, but nature itself paints the landscape with light.
And I think... Oh, no, there's one more. I believe. Here it is. Another long exposure.
Also Brittany, perhaps.
François took it. And here it is. He says, Plage de Gounérou. Given the name I would expect.
Well, that's really interesting. Lots of good qualities. I actually love the colour, which is rather warm, probably warmer than it might have been to the naked eye. But it does work very, very well for that. I love the swirl of the water and the long exposure, the repetition of shape there. At least the way it's rendering here, the sky's a little too bright, and I would suggest just dampening that down a bit. And I think indeed that the sea on the left-hand side is a little bit bright too. And as a result of that, it doesn't feel quite as balanced as it could be. But it's a delightful scene.
Do you always try, in your photograph, to almost have a trail or leading the viewer to a particular spot?
No, not necessarily. What I am interested in is depth, is conveying depth. But no, I've tried to be open to any number of different compositional possibilities. Having said that, there are certain tactics I know I use, but no, there isn't one way of doing it.
Okay. Well, I believe this is the last one, and this ends this wonderful experience, at least for me, and I hope for you guys as well. Thank you so much, Joe, for this hour and 15 minutes with us. It's much more than I had hoped for. I hope you guys learn a lot from this episode. I've learned quite a lot from this episode. I hope for those of you who have shared your photograph, even though they were not picked, doesn't mean that they were not good. Far from it. But we had to pick some photograph, and just keep on. Keep on doing what you do, and you remember my motto: if you like it, well, capture it. And until then, well, it was a pleasure meeting you, and see you soon.
Thanks, Tom.
Cheers.